I'm Menachem Learfield, and this is Yada Yada Yiddish, where we break down Seinfeld episodes and try and extract the Jewish gems contained within. We are focusing on Season 8, Episode 10. In this episode, George is trying to get an apartment across the hall from his, which is a better apartment.
I'm out! Fantastic apartment right across from mine, huh? I can't wait for you to see it.
And he learns that there's an elderly gentleman named Mr. Eldridge. And Mr. Eldridge is a survivor of the Andrea Doria shipwreck.
Unfortunately, Clarence Eldridge in 8C has decided that he wants the apartment. Mr. Eldridge is an Andrea Doria survivor. And in light of the terrible suffering that he's already been through, we've decided to give it to him.
And because he is a survivor and he's gone through so much, the superintendent decides that she's going to give him the apartment instead of George. And obviously, in very George fashion, comedy ensues. And he decides that who is this guy to get the apartment just because he was the survivor of a shipwreck?
He doesn't deserve it, though. Even if he did suffer, that was like 40 years ago. What have you done for me lately? I've been suffering for the past 30 years, up to and including yesterday.
And we see this character, George, and this is probably the most George we ever see George, as this character that has endured so much suffering and so many difficult parts of life. And he sees that as the reason why he deserves something else. It's this classic personality that looks at life and all the things that go wrong instead of seeing any of the things that go right. There's nothing more George than that. And it really made me think of a good friend of mine, Brad Licht. And I'm going to try something a little different. We've never done this on Yada Yada Yiddish. We've done so on other podcasts that I host, where we bring on guests. Today, we have the special privilege of having Brad come and share his story with us because I think it is so different from George's. And I think when we look at Brad's story and his life versus George's life, we can see two completely opposite ways that a person can approach the challenges that they go through. There are those that go through very minimal things, and we blow them out of proportion and we say, why me? Why me? Why does this happen? And then there are people who have gone through such difficulties in their life, and yet they emerge from those difficulties with gratitude and appreciation. So without further ado, it is my honor and pleasure to bring on the show a dear friend of mine, Brad Licht. Brad, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We'll talk a little bit more about the connection to your story once we hear it. When I first heard your story, and it's interesting because I got to experience your story like firsthand as it was all unfolding. And I'd love for you to walk our listeners through your personal journey, both medically and then also emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, to where you were, let's say, a year or two ago versus where you are today.
Sure. Absolutely. It was quite the journey, let me say. So it's March of 2025. So this all started in July of 2023. My youngest is Amanda's on the Israel national softball team, and she's getting ready for a tournament in Canada. And we went out to hit, and I've been her hitting coach and her batting practice pitcher for many, many years. And I have, the last few times I thought to myself, not really a good idea. She hits the ball way too hard. So we were in the middle of our session, and I threw an outside pitch, and she hit the ball. I didn't quite get behind the screen quickly enough, and she hit the ball directly into the back of my ribs, and I went down like a lead weight. And the first thing I thought of is I've got to get to the urgent care. And of course I didn't. I got up, finished the session.
In true male form.
And absolutely. Yeah. It's like I'm not
There's
sitting
a reason
there all day.
why women outlive us by like 30 years. And that's the reason.
No question. No question about it. So I healed slowly from that. I had a bruise literally the entire length of my back. You could see where the ball struck me, and the bruise, it looked like a comet on my back. And a couple weeks later, I was on a mountain bike ride with one of my brothers, and it was really interesting. Middle of the summer in July, and beautiful day, and it starts raining, but the sun's out. And we stopped and we commented about how beautiful it was. It looked like crystals coming down from the sky. And we continued our ride. We turned a corner, went down part of the trail, and it had rained a couple days before and it was completely washed out. And the little bit of rain that had fallen made the trail really slick. And my rear tire slid into that and kind of shot me off the bike. And I I knew immediately I separated my ribs, and this was kind of the first injury was back left. This was front right,
And
and
again,
it popped
you
into
never
my
went to the
head.
doctor after the first injury, right?
No,
No,
of
you're
course not.
just walking
And
it
this
off.
and the second one, I could barely breathe, and my first thought was because I'm on blood thinners. I'm like, get to the urgent care. Thought, nah, I got to finish this ride. So what did I do? Of course, I finished the ride, limped around for a couple weeks, let it heal. I called my brother again, Gary, ready to go. So we go on a different ride. And I said, I want to take it easy. And we tried to avoid some of the tough stuff. And I got to a bridge I had never been to. And the bridge had no rails, which is kind of interesting. And I tried to pull up on the bridge because it was a little bit higher than the trail. And the bridge was about 3 feet wide. And my front tire just went perpendicular. And I put my foot down, put my brakes on, should have just stopped, but my front tire went over the bridge and I followed along. And this time I dropped down about 3 feet. Thank God I didn't fall on the bike, but I heard crack, 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 crack. And I'm like, okay, now I have to go to the urgent care. I just broke my ribs. So we limped back to his house, got to the urgent care. They were going to take an MRI, and well, actually an X-ray. And when I reminded them that I was on blood thinners, they said, you know what, we need to technically transfer you to the emergency room, and we've got to take a CAT scan. So CAT scan came back, no internal bleeding, all good news. I was really sore. They sent me home. They said there's not much they can do. And I got a call probably an hour later from the urgent care. And I assumed it was just a call to see how they did and if I would take a survey. So I let it go to voicemail, listened to it a little later. The doctor told me that he unfortunately forgot to tell me they found a cyst on my kidney and I need to get to my primary care and get an MRI immediately. And the cyst turned out to be cancer. And it was just very interesting to me because I would have never known I had cancer. I've really never had any rib injuries, and I had 3 rib injuries within a month. Somebody up there was telling me, get to the doctor, find out what's going on. So,
And it's crazy how long it took you to get the message. I mean, it's like time and time.
well, in all fairness, I had the back left portion of the ribs hurt, the front right, the front left. I still had one more portion of my ribs to go. I could have waited one more injury, but
We're glad you
I
did.
decided, yeah, I'll go in. So it was, it was a shocker. To hear the C word is a big time shocker. And one of my brothers coincidentally had kidney cancer 2 years prior. And I called him up. He had successful surgery. My cyst was the size of a peanut. His was the size of a plum. And I went to his doctor. So he had to get his full kidney removed. I went to his doctor, and it was considered a partial nephrectomy, supposed to be relatively routine, kind of like an arthroscopic knee surgery. They use a robot. They don't make incisions. They make a couple puncture holes. They take the cyst and a tiny bit of the kidney. So I had that surgery probably about a month after my broken ribs. And it was supposed to be a really simple, easy recovery. And immediately, right out of surgery, I just felt horrendous. And I thought to myself, man, they undersold this. this is not an easy recovery. I can barely walk around. I'm supposed to take laps around the hospital floor, and I could barely take one. And they said, I had big time pains in my upper chest area. And they said it was free air from the surgery. So they sent me home 3 or 4 days later, and I kept getting worse. I had fever, went back to my urgent care that found the cancer in the first place, and they took more tests. And one of the tests they took was to see if there's any blood infection, but that takes a few days to get back. So they did send me back to the emergency room, and it was nighttime. I think it was a Sunday night, and there was an old time surgeon on staff, and he decided not to take any tests. His big test for me, believe it or not, maybe 4 days post surgery, was to pretend I was jump roping. And I did it. I jump roped a few times, and he said, "Did that hurt?" I said, "Well, it didn't feel good, but it wasn't excruciating." He said, "You have pneumonia." So that was how he decided I had it for pneumonia. And they treated me for pneumonia for 2 weeks. And I got a call. Actually, I think it was on a Shabbos, and I saw it was the urgent care again. And I answered, and they said, "Get to the ER immediately. You have a blood infection." So I went back to the same hospital in Boulder, and they had to do emergency surgery. They opened me up, and they basically, without getting too graphic, they took my colon out, washed it underwater. What the doctor, his analogy was, when you have a flat tire on a bike, you pump it up, you put it underwater, and you see where it's leaking. They couldn't find a leak. So they sewed me back up, and I proceeded to get worse and worse and worse. And there were a couple things that they tested and realized they actually had gotten a blood infection back. And it's a blood infection that I didn't realize at the time, but I think 40% of people actually survive it. And they had to open me up again 4 days later. And this time they did find the damage, and they found quite a bit of damage. They found that my colon was nicked, my small intestine was nicked, my ureter was nicked, and I had a nick on my distending intestine. So what the theory is, the robot that did the surgery the first time sparked and caused all the damage, but it took them 2 weeks to figure that out. So I had yet another surgery. I was in ICU. I think I was in the hospital a total of 40 days, I want to say. And I finally got back home, and I could barely get out of a chair. I had an electric recliner that I used. I had one in my bedroom and one in the family room. And my big goal in life at that point was to walk around my kitchen island. That's how weak I was. I had lost, I think, I had lost in total probably around 50 pounds during all this. And that is when you visited me, Rabbi.
I remember those walks around the counter.
Yeah. Well, it was a Friday afternoon, and at that time I was so down physically, so down mentally. I have an older sister and 3 older brothers who all live in Denver, and we're all very, very close. I didn't want to see anybody. I didn't want to see my family. I didn't want to see my friends. I just kind of wanted to wallow in my sorrow and really just try to survive, because I went home.
Did you not want to see them, or you didn't want them to see you?
I didn't want to see them. I had already lost, when you're in the hospital, it not only is it demoralizing, but it's humiliating. And what I went through, every doctor, every nurse had seen me at my worst. And I didn't really care about that. I didn't want to converse with anybody. I was in so much pain, physically and mentally, that I just didn't want to have the conversation. And keep in mind, I kind of skipped over the story because literally, it could take hours to really explain in detail what happened. But when I went home, I had an ostomy bag in the front. I had 3 drains coming out of my intestine, draining infection. One thing I failed to tell you was the wound had gotten infected between the 3rd surgery and the time I had switched care down to Swedish. So I had a wound vac that I would carry over my shoulder. And I also had a PICC line because my wife had to give me IV antibiotics 3 times a day for 6 months. So I just was in no shape physically or mentally to see anybody. And the doorbell rang, and I looked through the side light, and there you were, like an angel. Didn't feel like an angel though. And I remember turning to Dana. She was in the kitchen, and I
Tell
said,
him to go
"Dana,
away."
I said, did you tell Rabbi Lehrfield he could come over?" She's like, "No, I had no idea." So she answered the door, and there you were with a chicken noodle soup, I believe, or maybe matzo ball soup, and fresh challah for Shabbos. And I didn't want to just sit there because what I found was whenever anybody would visit me, and it's human nature, I did it many, many times, and they ask you what happened, and I didn't want to go into detail because it was so traumatic. I was legitimately suffering from PTSD. I didn't want to relive it. I'd give them a high level summary of what happened, and they would proceed because they wanted to make me feel like I wasn't alone, and they'd tell me about their bad back or their hangnail. And I didn't want to hear about that either. But you didn't do that. You didn't do that. We decided we were going to walk on the driveway. It was going to be a big walk for
Which is
me. I
such
was
an
going to walk
important
all
lesson,
the
by
way.
the way. And I want to get back. I don't want to cut you off too much, but this episode, so you weren't there at the beginning. We started off with some clips from the Seinfeld episode. It's really all about this idea of it's so human nature to try and compare, the struggles and challenges that we have to other people. And it almost becomes this contest where we're trying to like out suffer the other. And I don't know why we do it. It's like a way that we feel like we're connecting with someone else by, oh, you had this thing. Oh my gosh, you should have seen what happened to me when I was. And it's not a contest, right? You can be suffering and I can be suffering in different ways. And me trying to like downplay your suffering by saying how much more I'm suffering, which is a very George-esque thing to do, is like you said, on the other side of it, when a person's really going through a struggle, like that's not what they want to hear. And it's so
I think
invalidating.
Sure. And one of my realizations was, and it didn't help, but I realized people wanted to empathize with me. But what I went through, not many people have gone
Right.
through, and if they have, they probably may not have survived. I hate to say, but I think it's a form of empathy where somebody wants to feel your pain and and they can't even relate. So they'll quickly search their memory bank for the worst pain they've ever been in.
Which is interesting because that is a good strategy. That is a good empathic strategy. The problem is when they open their mouth and share that, right? So that's a good
Yes,
strategy to use in our head and then keep that inside without saying like, okay, this is what happened to me when it was bad.
exactly. Because quite frankly, I'm an empathetic guy. I'm sympathetic. I love to hear other people's plight. I was not in the state
No.
of mind to hear other people's plight. I just wasn't. So back to the story. You came over. You gave us the matzo ball soup. You gave us the challah, which was wonderful. By the way, I could barely eat any of it, but I remember having a couple bites. And we walked. The big walk was out my front door, down to the street and up, got a long driveway kind of up the hill. And that was going to be my big walk. And I remember walking with you, feeling sorry for myself, being in tremendous pain. And I asked you, Rabbi Lehrfield, why me? And I was waiting for this amazing rabbi answer, some philosophical answer, some Torah related answer that was going to make me feel better. And I will always remember your answer like it was yesterday. You said, I don't know. Nobody knows because it doesn't matter. We'll never know because it might be your soul in a past life needs something. We just don't know. But all I know, Brad, is you've got to figure out what your purpose in life is and what your purpose in life right now is. And right now it's to get up every morning and to get out of that recliner and walk, 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 because I had to get strong enough for my final surgery, my reversal surgery, which seemed like miles and miles away, because I knew it was at best it was going to be 3 or 4 months away, and it could be 6 to 9 months away. And I couldn't have the surgery until I was strong enough physically. And, we can get more into it as we go along, but my realization in hindsight was I could not get better physically until I got better mentally and in turn spiritually, which I had no idea. That wasn't on my radar at all. One thing that was so interesting to me, and there's so many things I see in hindsight from this, there's so many things about the whole journey that I really don't remember, and I'm glad I don't remember. But one thing that was so interesting to me is it started with you, Rabbi, coming to my house and not wanting to see you, and you bringing us the food you brought us and being there for me and praying for me. I always felt like whenever somebody in the community had something wrong, my wife and I would always be there bringing them a meal, and it felt so good to give, but it's hard to accept that, to receive. And I realized in hindsight that the old expression, it takes a village, it was so important as part of my healing. Once I realized it's okay to let visitors in, that to everything that everybody did for me, all praying that was done for me all over the world, really amazing, that it truly takes a village. And it took a village for me to get to where I was. You can't do it on your own. And it's an amazing thing. And it's such an important lesson for me, the ability to not only give, but to graciously receive.
Rabbi Dessler used to say that you can divide the world into givers and takers. And somebody who's truly a giver is a giver even when they're receiving. Even when they're on the receiving end, they can receive graciously in a way that they're giving the person the opportunity to give and making them feel good about giving. And it doesn't only help you as the receiver, but it helps the giver as well. And it kind of creates this almost like this symbiotic relationship. And yeah, it does take a village. And thankfully you had that village. And I think a lot of us have the village and we just don't even realize that we have it.
Absolutely.
So once you had that mindset shift, what then started to happen?
So great question. There was no mindset shift where I woke up the next day and realized what I needed to do. It was, in hindsight, just this amazing process of what happened to me, all these little golden nuggets that started falling out of the sky on my head, if you will. And just the realization of what I was going through and how I was going to get through it. And the first one was what you said to me. Second one was another rabbi had mentioned that I make a gratitude journal. And because I was sitting at home, I'm not a guy to sit around, as you know. I'm always busy doing things, whether it's work, things with my family, hobbies, whatever. I don't like to sit at home. And I was sitting at home staring at a wall, feeling sorry for myself and in agony, mentally and physically. And the gratitude journal was really easy the first day. Wasn't too hard the second day. It was really hard to write anything after day two. And what I started doing is I started writing in that part of my notes what I was going to do when I get better. When I get better, I'm going to be a better husband. I'm going to be a better father. I'm going to give more to tzedakah. I'm going to study the Torah more. That's always been a big goal of mine that I never really had a plan for. But when I got better, I was going to do all those things. And my son, who at the time was a senior at MIT, he's a finance, computer science guy, but he also is very, very into nutrition and mental fitness and discipline. He was sending me a bunch of things. He sent me, if anybody's familiar with Jocko Willink, who is a former Navy SEAL or maybe Army Ranger. And it's just this little clip on YouTube that he says that a colleague came to him, and the colleague looked down and he said, "What's wrong?" And the colleague said to Wilnick, he said, "I'm not going to tell you." I said, "Why?" Because I know what you're going to say. Because what am I going to say? He said, "You're going to say good." And he said, "You're right. I am going to say good." And he goes on and talks about in a, kind of former military guy voice that make you feel like you could run through a wall. He says, when the mission gets scrubbed, good. It's a chance to learn from your mistakes, prepare for the next mission, and be even more prepared. You don't get the raise or the promotion you want. Great. Work a little harder. When you're up for it, get even better one. The girl you wanted to ask on a date said no. And he goes through this whole thing and he says, if you can say good, he goes, that means you're alive. You're still breathing. And it's a chance to get up, dust off, regroup, recalibrate, and go out on the attack. And that was a, something that resonated with me, but it was kind of more funny at the time than anything else. You have to have humor during difficult times. And I can't tell you how many doctor's appointments and wound clinics and CAT scans and on and on and on, interventional radiology appointments. And every time we went, Dana and I, my wife, we would be at the doctor's, and there'd be a complication. The doctor would have to go out of the room to consult with somebody. And we'd look at each other and we'd shake our heads like, you got to be kidding me. What's next? And one of us would always smile, and we knew what was coming. We'd smile, and one of us would say, good. Why not? Bring it on. What more can you give me? And I've got to smile and handle it. It became humorous, in a crazy way. And that was one. And David Goggins, who's another former Navy SEAL and Army Ranger. And that guy, if anybody knows him, he's amazing, but he's a little bit of a psycho in a good way, I guess. Long story, interesting story. If you don't know it, I would recommend looking it up. But he was something like 130 pounds overweight, and he had 8 weeks to lose the weight and to go to Army Ranger, Navy SEAL school, I guess it was. He did it. He ends up going, he fails 3 or 4 times. And I actually have a friend who was in one of his classes, and he confirmed that it's a true story. And he finally passed and became a Navy SEAL, went on many missions, and he realized that the journey of all that pain and suffering, he wanted to do it again. So he renounced his Navy SEAL moniker, and he went into the Army Rangers, wanted to be a scrub there. He wanted to start from the beginning, and he became an Army Ranger. And this guy now runs 200-mile marathons. He had the record for a while for most pull-ups in a 17, why 17, I don't know, but 17-hour period of something like 4,000 pull-ups. And my son sent that to me, and I remember calling him like, Joey, I can't, I don't, this guy doesn't resonate with me at all. Why'd you send me this? I'm not going to get better and run 200 miles. And then he's like, Dad, just listen to the whole interview. And I remember the interviewer asked him, he's like, how do you run 200 miles? And this was like such a big epiphany for me. And Goggins said, let me tell you, every day I go for a run, whether it's 200 miles, 2 miles, doesn't matter. I sit on my bed, I stare at my running shoes, and I can't put them on. And this guy, if you've listened to him, every other word is cuss words. I won't say it on this, but he said, I finally say, F it. I've got to put these shoes on and run. And he said, but it's more than that. Every single step hurts. I have no cartilage left in my knees. And I realize I've got to put one foot in front of another. And all of a sudden, that golden nugget fell out of the sky because I'm laying on an electric recliner, knowing I've got to get up, fight through all the pain, and start walking. And I'm talking walking 100 yards. You know, they wanted me eventually to walk a couple miles at a time. And that was a big one. And then another big transformational moment for me was a friend of mine had some medical issues and she recommended a medical counselor. And that's what this guy specializes in. And if you've ever seen the movie Molly's Game, it's the actor, it's a true story, and the actor who plays her father is Kevin Costner, and the character, the real life guy's name is Larry Bloom, and he's in his 70s, and he's a medical counselor. And I set up a Zoom appointment with him, and we said our introductions. He said, so tell me what's going on. I said, okay, I'll try to make a long story short. Yeah. So I thought I was really brief. I gave him the 10-minute overview, and he's just sitting there like this, just listening to me the entire time. And I finish, and there's an awkward silence. He goes, are you done? And I said, yes. And in my mind, I'm like, wow, I must have really been too wordy. He goes, Brad, he goes, this is a really bad way for us to start a client-patient relationship, but this is the most complicated medical issue and journey I've ever heard of. And I've been doing this for over 50 years. And we worked through things. And he said something to me that really resonated. We were drilling down on what is getting to me so badly, what's bumming me out. And I told him, I said, I've got this surgery that isn't even set. It's supposed to be 10 times more complicated than the 3 complicated surgeries I've had in the past couple months. And I've got to get up, get better, and be healthy enough to get this surgery done. And he said, you're borrowing fear from the future. Said, you don't know what this surgery is going to be like. It doesn't matter. You're going to have it. He said, you can't borrow fear from the future. You've got to, you're legitimately suffering from PTSD, and you've got a voice inside your head, which, I realized was the Yetzer Hara saying, you can't do this. Just lay down. You're not strong enough. I was doubting myself. It's like, maybe I'm not so physically strong. I'm not so mentally strong. And he said, you've got to kick that voice to the curb, get it out of your head, get up. You're a former athlete. You've got to get up, and you've got to take care of yourself, and you've got to walk as much as possible to get strong enough for the surgery. So that was a big one also. The other one, my son, who was Joey, who was sending me all these great motivational things. He was helping me with my nutrition. He said, just as an aside one day, he's like, you know what, Dad, I at the time he was studying with the Chabad rabbi at MIT. And he said, I'm studying the portion of the Parsha every day with my rabbi. Why don't you, I'll send you the book we're using, and you read it every day, and we can talk about it at the end of the week. And I thought, you know what? My big goal, when I get better, one of the things I was going to do is study Torah. I'm like, I'm sitting at home staring at a wall with nothing to do. I'm not better, but why don't I do it now? And I started, Joey sent me the book, and I started where he was. And talk about golden nuggets falling out of the sky. I've never, ever read every word of the Torah, not even close. And I usually, if like Rabbi Lehrfield, you and I might have a weekly session, you give me a little parsha tidbit, 5 minutes. It's a great life lesson, and I move on with life. And I started reading everything in English, and I was reading the commentaries, and it was unbelievable how what I was going through was so relatable with what I was learning in the Torah. And I would take a picture of little tidbits of what I was learning and I would send it to Joey. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. This like totally relates to me. And it was on and on and on. And one thing led to another. And Joey was also wrapping his tefillin every day. And he said, Dad, why don't you do this with me? And we'll do it in the morning, talk about it. And I said, sure, why not? And I wrapped it, and I wasn't sure I was wrapping it right. And I think I went onto YouTube to see how to wrap it properly. And I came to the realization, I don't need to wrap it perfectly. I am doing something that is feeling good to me. And if I've always had this whole concept about Judaism. There's 613 mitzvahs, and how am I ever going to be able to do them all? It just sounds so overwhelming. Why even do any, right? And I had the realization, it's like I'm not reading the Hebrew when I'm studying the parshas. I may not be wrapping my tefillin correctly, but it felt really good. And I remember when I was in Israel the first time, Rabbi Yom Tov Glazer, it's now a buddy of mine and I mountain bike with. He, I, I was, we were doing a lot of study and I was overwhelmed. And I took a class from him and I went up to him after the class and I said, you've got to help me. I'm drowning in Torah. And he looks at me, he goes, and I told him I'm a mountain biker. And I said, I'm just drowning in prayer. And he goes, dude, don't pray. Come mountain biking with me. And it was such an epiphany because I felt guilty. Well, if I don't do all these prayers, I'm in Israel. I've got to do this all. And I stopped and I realized, what I learned from that is do what feels good to you. Do it on your own. Take your own path. You don't have to just dive in with both feet. And he also taught me when we did wrap tefillin together when I was there about saying the Shema and just holding that the note of the last word of the first line and just covering your eyes and almost meditatively connecting to God. And that's what I was doing in my home office at home when I was wrapping my tefillin. And it got to the point where, and I didn't know how to pray. What am I supposed to say? Because I didn't want to feel like a hypocrite. It's like, God, thank God I've had this amazing life and I don't wake up every morning and thank you for this amazing life. And now I'm going to be a hypocrite and ask you to heal me. I didn't think it was an appropriate thing to do. But what came about, it was very organic, is I really started, even in the state I was in, I started thanking God for my blessed life to the point where when I came to the realization of what's coming out of my mouth, and this is how I felt, this isn't what somebody told me to say, is I realized I do have a blessed life. And I've got to do my part. I can pray to God for help, but I can't just sit back and a miracle is going to happen, that God's going to miraculously heal me. And I'm wrapping my tefillin. I had to miss my pick line. I had my wound vac over my shoulder. I had my drain bags in my pocket, and I'm wrapping my tefillin and trying to miss everything. And I realized that it wasn't just words when I said, thank you for this blessed life. For some crazy reason, I believed it. I felt it in my heart and in my soul, how blessed I was. And, my kids always teased me because when they were little, a toy would break or, somebody, when the kids would take something of theirs and, oh, they broke it, they made it bad. And we'd go to the workshop at my workbench and we'd fix it. And I'd always say to them, and I truly believed it, but to this day they laugh at me because they don't believe it. But I'd always say, you know what, this is amazing. We just fixed this and it's better than it was originally. And I believed it. And that's kind of always been my mantra. And I didn't realize it at the time when I was wallowing in my sorrow, that is kind of always the way I've looked at life. And I realize is at a certain point, I'm going through this, but look at where I'm at. I'm reading the Torah every day. I'm rapping tefillin. I'm having truly a personal relationship with God. I'm speaking to God every morning and thanking him for what an amazing life I have. And that it was amazing when I look back at it. Once that happened, and again, no rabbi came to me and said, "You've got to do this. This is the only way you're going to heal." It just happened totally organically. All of a sudden, I started getting a little stronger. I started being able to take longer walks, and that light at the end of the tunnel just felt like I was never going to see it. All of a sudden, I saw a dim light at the end of the tunnel. Like I've got this. I've got to do my part, and I've got to get strong. I've got to eat well. I've got to grind through the pain and get strong enough. And the surgeon who was doing my final surgery, really interesting guy. I think he went to medical school at like 14. He's like the real life Doogie Howser. I remember him telling me I visit him once a month. He was my once a month guy. The other doctors I was seeing weekly. And I would always ask him, "When's my surgery going to be? When's my surgery?" He goes, "I don't know." It's kind of like your answer. It's like, "I don't know." He said, "But I will know when you're ready." And I'm like, "How are you going to know that?" He goes, "You're going to walk into my office and you're going to have so much energy. You're going to be bouncing off the walls like Tigger from Winnie the Pooh. And I'm going to see it in your eyes. And I'm going to know it's time to set your surgery." So I go every month. And I faked it. I tried to fake it. I was trying to be super positive. I was driving my wife crazy because every time I'd go to a doctor, I'd complain to her because she was my nurse at home, an amazing nurse that truly saved my life. But that's another story that I could talk about for hours. But I would go and see doctors, and I'd be at home. "Dana, this hurts, that hurts, this isn't working right." And I would go into the doctors and they'd say, "How you doing?" And I'd say, "Great, amazing." And I meant it. I felt it. And she's like, "Brad, did you forget about, she was with me at the point. "Did you forget about this, that, the other thing?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I guess so, but I feel great." So finally, I got strong enough to have that surgery, but it took many, many months, and it a lot of pain and suffering, it reminds me of another thing that Joey had sent me is William Wong, who started NVIDIA. He sent me a little clip on him, and he's talking to Stanford graduate students. And he says, "Stanford graduate students, I wish you nothing but pain and suffering." And the whole room breaks up laughing. He goes, "No, I'm serious." He goes, "That's the person I want working for me. I don't want the guy who's top in his class who has never had any pain and suffering. Everything's gone easy for him. I want the guy who's had ample doses of pain and suffering, who's grinded through things, figured out solutions. That's the guy I want on my team." And all these things, there's just this realization. It's like, it's okay to suffer. It's okay to have pain. You can grind through it, with the help of everybody around you, your community, your religion, yourself, just physically taking that step after step. Like Goggin said, every step kills, but to get to the finish line, you've got to take those steps. And that was just such a big epiphany for me. And I in hindsight, it's so surreal to me what I went through, but it's equally an opposite surreal to me where I am now. And I'm with one less kidney. Unfortunately, the kidney was fine, but the ureter was shot. The surgeon took my appendix out because he had put mesh to kind of rebuild my abdomen. He said he hopes that nobody ever goes back in there. And I had, I don't know how many, I think the final surgery, I had something like 60 staples. Was the incision went this way, it went that way. And that's not the prettiest. I don't look at it very often. But as crazy as it sounds, I feel like the luckiest guy in the world. I wouldn't wish what I went through on anybody, but for me, I thank God for the experience and the journey. I feel like it's made me a better person. I mean, not just mentally, spiritually. I mean, physically. I mean, it that Dana may she sees me, she may laugh and say, "Really, Brad?" But I feel like I'm stronger. I could go on better bike rides. It's just been a crazy experience.
I have a teacher, Rabbi Usher Resnick, who used to say all the time, and he has a book actually that this became the title of his book. And he does say that pain is a reality, but suffering is a choice. And I think there's so much depth to that. We cannot escape pain. Inevitably in life, there's always going to be some sort of physical, spiritual, emotional pain. But we can choose whether or not we're suffering. We can choose whether we allow that pain to become suffering or whether we allow it to, even in retrospect. When you're in it, that's a different story. We've talked about that many times. This idea that tsar, the Hebrew word for pain, is the same as the word tsar, which means narrow. Because when I'm going through a difficult situation, I'm like, I have blinders on. I can't see beyond it. I can't see past it. I'm kind of stuck in that space. I say often when you're inside the jar, you can't see the label. You can only see the label when you're outside the jar. But to be able to even go out and look backwards, when we look at the story itself, we see all these like cool coincidences that are happening one after the other in perfect order. And then, we tie it with a nice, neat bow. And then the Jewish people are saved. And like all Jewish holidays, they tried to kill us. They didn't. Let's eat. And we eat and we have a party and we turned into a holiday. But we have to keep in mind, if you were living through that story, which took years, by the way, we read it in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and it all makes sense from the bird's eye view. But when they were living through the story, even like immediately afterwards, it's very hard to see how each one of those events is actually connecting to the one before and after. The events were unfolding because God was guiding them. And when we listen to the Megillah, our purpose is not just to hear this historic story and say, oh, that was a cool story, but it's to write our own Megillah. It's to write the Megillah of our lives and look back and see all the things that have happened to us, all the things that have led us to where we are today, and recognize, like you said, you are better off as a result of all the things that came before it. Even if you never would have chosen it, even if you never wished that it happened, but it did happen. And now you have a choice. How are you going to look at it? How are you going to write your Megillah? And it's so remarkable how you've chosen to write yours. I mean, your story is such a remarkable story because you're able to look at it with all the pain and with all the things you've gone through. And I remember you were telling the story once and you left out the cancer part. And I said to you, it's bad when the thing you forgot in your story was cancer, right?
Absolutely. It's the craziest thing. It's like, these are all the things I went through. And, that's right. I had cancer.
I also had cancer.
Yeah. Yeah. And
but to go through all that.
It's so interesting what you're saying, because I went from why me, God, why me, to thanking God while I was in my lowest of lows, to I love this term that my son sent me after I had recovered. He gave me, like I said, all these amazing things along the way. He would just kind of feed me this and feed me that. He also, one thing I didn't talk about is the mid-cingulate cortex. He explained to me scientifically in my brain how the suffering is going to make me be able to suffer even more and be stronger. And it's true. It's amazing. And what the nugget he gave me afterwards is a term called post-traumatic growth. And I love that. If you think about it, you can live your life saying, why me, poor me, or you can look at it as, I look at it as amazing accomplishment. I'm pretty proud of being able to get through that and grind through it. And there are certain things I don't know if my lifespan, probably my life expectancy is probably less than it was before all this. I don't care. I could exist through life and live to be 90, or I can live life, and if it's cut a little bit shorter than it might have from because of all this, it doesn't matter. It's about living life to the fullest and the appreciation. I'm in Rancho Mirage, California, which we have a house here, which is basically Palm Springs. And it's the coolest thing. I've got this neat courtyard, and where I have my office set up is in this little casita. And I walk into the courtyard every day when I wrap my tefillin, and I look up to the sky and see this amazing blue sky. And I thank God for the gift of life. It's, I didn't, I thought I was living life to the fullest before, but I didn't have an appreciation. I wasn't humbled by it. I didn't have the gratitude. And crazy thing, hopefully it doesn't take everybody to go through that much actual pain and suffering to get there. But it's amazing being on the other end, being able to look up at the blue sky and thank God for life. It's incredible to go from why me to feeling that gratitude every day. It's an amazing way to wake up every morning.
Well, Brad, thank you for sharing your story. This is very inspiring for me. My takeaway from this episode is that as we go through life and all the things that might happen, not to us, because that makes us sound very passive, but that happen in our lives, we have the ability to approach them like George, where we take trivial things that are really not a big deal, and we can turn them into the biggest deal to complain and why me, why me, why me? Or we can really ask that same question, why me? But for all the good things. Why do I deserve all these great things? Why do I deserve life itself? Why do I deserve all the blessings that God has given me? And when we make that choice, we write our Megillah. And we're all writing a story. The question is, do we want it to be this, bitter, difficult, horrible story, or do we want it to be this magical, beautiful Megillah? And we have that ability. We have that choice. So thank you for sharing that with us and inspiring us. If it's okay with you, I'll leave some of your contact information in the show notes if anybody wants to get in touch with you directly.
Absolutely. Would love to. And thank you for having me, Rabbi. It's been a pleasure and
Absolutely.
An honor to be on this, share my story.
And thank you all for watching or listening, however you are consuming this. If you are listening on podcasts and you enjoy this, don't forget to subscribe, share with a friend, leave us a 5-star review so others can find it as well. And if you have any questions, comments, feel free to reach out to me or Brad. And the contact information, again, will be in the show notes on the podcast. Thank you so much. Be well.